Everybody. Oh, okay, recording in progress. Hi, everybody. I am Christine Woods, and the name of the company is Woods Landscape Design. I'm here tonight to share with you a lot of information about Firewise landscaping, as well as how do you even begin to work with a professional to figure out what to do with a brand new landscape design. So I have designed this webinar to be into 3 sections so that we can take some time in between to answer questions. So we're not waiting until the very end to answer all the questions. So I have been a landscape designer in the Boulder County for over 16 years. I do all sorts of landscape design and installation projects. So we're going to just start right in with
Hey Chris, I may have you just put it in presenter mode if that works.
Oh yes.
Perfect.
Yes, how's that?
Beautiful.
Does that work? Great. Thank you for that. Thanks, Melanie, for all of your help with that. So how do you start to create a new landscape design? That's going to be the first topic of this webinar, and then we'll take time for questions. The next part will be, how do you create a fire resistant design? How do you create defensible space, and what exactly are Firewise landscaping principles? We'll pause again and take some questions, and then we'll go over plant suggestions, as well as there's a lot of links and resources to share with you as well. And I understand that at the end, those of you who have signed up for this, you'll be getting an email with a survey, and that survey will also include these resource links. So let's just get into, how do you start with a brand new landscape design, right? Or even a renovation. And first, let me actually say that condolences to anyone who has lost their home and landscape due to any fire, including the Marshall Fire. And great for Resource Central to be able to offer to you guys at least some sort of, gardens in a box plans to get you started with your renovations. So how do you start with a landscape design? It's really important to start out and have what we call a master landscape plan, right? That's a master landscape plan will give you information for how much square footage you've got with your project, so that's easy to estimate, and your installers have that information so that you can know how much materials to buy, where the particular patio is going to be, etc. So no matter if you're going to be hiring a landscape professional to do your design work, or if you're going to be doing some of that installation yourself, it's really important to start with and have a master landscape plan. And the plan is really a collaboration between you, the homeowner, and your landscape professional. And if you are in the process of building a new home, it would also be included. You might be able to include your home builder on that too, for things like installing a gas line, looking at where the downspouts are going to be relocated so that you can use that water and utilize that on site. Maybe you want to install some power for future lighting or water features. So it's important to have a collaboration and open communication going. Also, when you create a new landscape design or retrofit, you're going to want to talk about Firewise landscaping principles and practices, how to maintain your new garden and to protect your home. What proper plants per your microclimates and materials. Your landscape professional can help you with permits and HOA requirements. There will be discussions about, what kind of hardscape materials might work well with your architecture. What would be great for retaining walls? Was that going to be boulders? Is that going to be concrete block? They can help you with boulder, where boulder placement might work for retainment or just for aesthetic value. There's gravel chip is, we're going to be talking about that a lot for mulch with Firewise landscaping, and you know, your landscape professional can gear you towards what mulches, what gravel mulches can look good with your landscape and also with your current architecture. One thing you want to keep in mind too when you're doing a design is that roof water is free for you, right? It comes down, it's on your property, and you want to make sure that you can utilize that roof water with your gutters and your drainage so that you can create either rain gardens or just keep it on your property to irrigate your property. You know, with the tragedy that some of you have experienced through the Marshall Fire and everything, it, you know, while it is definitely a tragedy, you could look at it as an advantage too, to start over, right? To create meaningful spaces. And one of those would be to connect front yard gardens between your neighbors so that you can continue to start creating habitat for pollinators and wildlife. So we call that connecting corridors, right? So you're connecting your front yard so that you create more habitat for pollinators and food and birds and everything. Also, it's important to work with, you know, a landscape professional so that you can pick the right plant materials for seasonal interest. So there's a lot of things that go into the design process. You would meet with a landscape professional on your site to discuss, you know, for example, what are your overall goals? Do you want to have an entertaining space? Do you want to have a space that's going to require, you know, that you want for contemplation, or maybe you want to do yoga, or maybe just a little quiet space that's kind of secluded, right? So that you can read or meditate or write or whatever. They'll help you to decide, you know, what's the style of the landscape going to look like? What would you like to happen in the shade? Do you need shade? Do you need some places for sun because you like to be out in the sun? They'll ask you questions about, you know, your maintenance level that's desired. They'll discuss with you what the design process actually is and what their fees are. And they'll review with you what the installation process is. Sometimes that would include phasing. Sometimes depending on the time of year, it might be a better time for planting than not. And you might be a better time to put in your hardscaping, for example. They'll also ask you what your budget is. And this is really important to know so that they can design within your budget limitations, right? And also what landscape professionals can help you do is to say, okay, well, if right now you can't afford to put in that flagstone patio, let's go ahead and create the space so that you can still be usable, but you could put that landscape flagstone in at a future date. So phasing is what we call that. Other things that the landscape professional will help you with on site, they'll be taking what's called a site analysis. So they'll be on site with you and they'll take elevations if necessary for slope. They'll be taking extra measurements. They'll be looking at the sun shade that is on your property, available microclimates. They'll be looking at your drainage, again, coming from your downspouts and just on your slope of your property if you need retainment. And they'll also take a lot of photos. Photos are really helpful when you go back to the studio to start creating. So some of the things that you'll need to provide as a homeowner is what we call a improvement location certificate, or an ILC. It's basically a plot plan of what your property looks like, what your house looks like on the property. It'll have boundaries of your property. And in some instances, if you guys are just starting to build a new house, architectural drawings could be helpful as well. Again, you know, this is a collaboration process between your design professional and yourself. So any pictures that you have that you can convey your ideas to the landscape professional is very, very helpful. because even if it's something that you don't like, it's very helpful for your designer to know what you like and don't like. So any photos, or some people send Pinterest boards. Some people have books that they know, or it could just be maybe your neighbor's yard that you really like and you want to kind of mimic some of that as well. So another thing that is really helpful to have is any of your HOA specs. That's really helpful so that we can design to those guidelines. Again, we talked about budget range is really helpful. And a landscape professional, when they meet with you for the first time on site, can give you a better idea of perhaps what your ideas will cost you. For example, they can tell you maybe what some square footage could be for patio options, and that can help you to design for your budget range. Again, it's a very open communication with your landscape professional. Everybody needs to have a comfort level with these new Firewise landscaping practices and materials, which we'll go over in this session. You want to talk about what is your passion for your yard as well. Do you want to bring in pollinator habitat? Are you, what kind of sustainable practices do you want to incorporate into your design, and do you want to create wildlife habitat as well? And I'd heard from some clients who had lost their homes that their insurance guidelines had changed. So it's important, if there's any of those guidelines that you have, that you share those with your landscape professional too, so that you can know that before you start the installation process. And another thing to consider, with a Marshall fire, I know that a lot of the homes that burn, there's a lot of toxic chemicals that had burned that was in the soil. So having a soil test is highly recommended, if you lost everything in the fire. And this is a graphic that was put out by Boulder County Public Health, which can help you to determine, what your risk of a soil contamination is, right? I imagine that for most of you who had lost your whole entire home, that soil was removed and replaced. But this is a resource guide that will also be in the resources package that is sent to you with the survey, that you can look at and say, hey, am I at high risk for soil contamination? And one thing I would say with that is, CSU Extension in Longmont, I believe, does soil testing. And so that's a good place to take your soil samples to. And CSU Extension also has a lot of great information and resources on their website for a plethora of things, including soil testing. And they have guidelines there for how you do take a soil test and submit that. And what I would suggest also is, if you're thinking of having a raised vegetable garden, or a vegetable garden, if your home did get destroyed in the fire, that maybe you want to consider having a raised bed with that, so that you can put in new soil that would not be contaminated. So, along with the design process, every landscape professional, has a different approach to their design process. Some do conceptual designs in their design process, and some will just go directly to a master design plan. And what that means is, when you meet with your landscape professional, they'll ask you a lot of questions, so that they can design for you. And sometimes the process can take a little longer than other times, just depending on your scope of work, the type of project and the installation that you want, and your individual professional that you're working with. So, but any of the professionals you work with will give you a master design plan, which means that that's got your hardscape and your plant elements all specified that you can take and have an estimate produced from. Once an estimate is produced for your installation, you can look to see where you are with your budget and adjust accordingly. Maybe you can't afford, 200, tons of boulders, but you can afford 100 tons of boulders, so that you can adapt to that estimate regarding your budget. Also, once there's an estimate for the project, you can go then to a contract with your landscape professional, and they can get you on their schedule for installation and then explain to you how the process of their installation will work. So again, every professional has their own ways of doing that. So at this time, we'll go ahead and take some questions regarding the design process, if anybody has any.
All right, thank you. Let's see what we have so far. Some of these are not entirely just the design process, but more specific, and you may cover this a little bit later, so feel free to punt it until then if you need.
Sure.
We have a question about landscape fabric when re-landscaping, given that there's quite a bit of weed potential in defensible space, and if it's realistic to use fabric under gravel mulch.
Right. So there's a lot of, again, a lot of people have different opinions about using weed fabric. So I like to say the pros and cons, right? So if you're going to be putting in a gravel walkway, it is to your advantage to put some sort of a very heavy duty weed fabric under there. What it does is it helps to compact that soil too, so that the chip will help to compact in that area. So it doesn't stay like squishy when you walk on it. So that's one advantage of using it. It can deter, I'm going to say deter, not prevent weeds from coming up, because what happens when you put any gravel chip down on top of weed fabric is the wind blows, which brings in soil, and then weeds blow, which brings in seeds. So wherever you have any contact like that, you're still going to have weeds growing. So
Okay, yeah, that definitely makes sense.
yeah, it's not quite a cut and dry yes and no answer.
Sure. Okay, and I do have a clarification. Fabric specifically in naturalized areas. And
that, that's something like you would really have to see the situation, I think, to really give a expert answer on that.
And we will be sending a list of some of the CSU resources in the follow-up email here. But we did get a question of places to look for good, I guess, designers that do use Firewise principles, and also follow up if you're taking new clients at this time.
Yes, my information is on the last slide in here. So yes, you can contact me if you're looking for any Firewise help with your Firewise landscaping. Yeah. And as far as finding, professionals, I would say look on the there's the ALCC website also, which is Association of Landscape Contractors of Colorado. So that's a professional website that those of us are on who belong. You could, and I would just ask those questions when you're interviewing to use someone. Do they know Firewise landscape principles and design and defensible space? Because that's really important. And then also ALCC, which is, I'm sorry, not ALCC, APLD, which is Association of Professional Landscape Designers, is another good resource for finding professionals. And then the ASLA, which is the Association for Landscape Architects, is another good one. Another good resource to find people is just word of mouth too. Ask your neighbors who you've been working with, and look and see who's working in the neighborhood and stuff like that as well.
Okay, great. Perfect. Thanks. Let's see if we have one more here. Are grasslands considered a part of the wildland urban interface?
Grasslands mean not, so, meet that are right butt up against to the homes, or that's a question that
So, yeah,
that might be a question for, the Boulder County, actually.
sure. Yeah, that's actually.
Yeah, because I'm just talking about residential right
Sure.
now.
All right. Well,
Wildfire Partners is also, I want to put a plug out for them. Wildfire Partners is a great organization in Boulder County that can help you. They're a nationally recognized model for wildfire mitigation. So they're also on the resource list at the end, and they will come out and assess your home for wildfire mitigation.
okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a reminder to everyone, we will be sending out quite a few resources at the end of this with CSU extension links and some other links that Chris has provided. All right, well, why don't we go ahead and keep moving?
Yep, great. Okay, so here's where we get into a lot of information. We'll go slow, and again, we'll take questions at the end of this section before we get into plants. So, how do you create a more fire resistant design? So, I would say there's a lot of information in this presentation. So, pass this information along to your neighbors and about defensible space around your home. And, basically what that is that you are looking to mitigate fire coming into your property and igniting and potentially igniting your home. So you want to minimize fuels. So, what that might be. What might fuels be? That could be plants, of course. That could be grass. That could actually be a fuel like firewood stacked too close to your house, or a propane tank too close to your house. You also really want to think about providing firefighters a safe environment to defend your property. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the presentation. And, a lot of developments, the homes are very closely built together. So when we go through these Firewise defensible space practices, I also want you to think about collaborating with your neighbors, because you might be trying to push that, I'm just going to say, your stack of firewood right away from your house, but you want to make sure it's not in the defensible space zone for your neighbor. Right. So you want to be thinking about all that. So defensible space it's divided into 3 zones. Zone 1, which we'll talk about first, is the your immediate zone. So that's between, right butt up against your house, at least 5 feet out from the furthest attached point of the structure. So by structure, it could be your home, it could be your garage, it could be a barn, it could be a shed. So you need to think about all of those structures and not just your home. So, zone 1 is the most critical area that you want to defend, because you don't want embers coming. If there was a potential for a fire and you had embers coming in there, you don't want to create any fuels that could ignite your home. Right. So zone 2 is 5 feet to 30 feet out from the furthest point of your structure. And there we want to reduce the amount of fuel that could be potentially ignited. And then in zone 3, you're looking at 30 feet to 100 foot plus, basically the rest of your property. And it's really important to, collaborate with your neighbors in those zones. So we'll go ahead and start with zone 1 here. So zone 1, as you can see in this graphic, it's the area within 5 feet immediately adjacent to your, we're just going to call it home for now, or around any structures. And so that is the zone that you want to make sure that is really hardened off and there's no ignition potential in that area. And so what you want to do is you want to try to eliminate all the ignition potential within that first 5 feet of all the structures. Again, if it's attached to the home, it's part of the home. So what that means is, you know, if you've got wooden stairs or decks, fences, gates that are attached to your home, that's considered a part of your home. So you want to use non-flammable materials for your stairs, decks, fencing, and gates. It's really important to try to continue to clean up combustible materials that are adjacent within first 5 feet of your home. So in other words, you know, don't store your firewood right there next to your home. Don't store anything that could potentially be combustible or flammable. You want to do your, you know, walk around your home a lot and remove any dead vegetation, dried leaves, pine needles, you know, any fibrous material that could blow in. And, you know, right now my cottonwood tree is shedding like crazy, and it's going to stop and build up at any point where there's a structure, right? So you want to get in there and clean that stuff out on a regular basis. This is a zone within first 5 to 8 feet actually that you really want to try to use gravel mulch. Flagstone or other hardscape materials, you know, brick, gravel paths around your home, and do not use any type of wood mulch within the first 5 to 8 feet of your home. It's really important to remove branches that overhang or touch your roof, your chimney, or your power lines, because if that tree catches on fire, that could catch your roof on fire. And it could bring down power lines as well. You know, ideally, it's best if you can remove all the trees within that first 5 feet, but especially conifers. So if you've got conifers that are really close to your house, you should think about removing those or trimming them back. If you do keep any of those trees that are really close to your house, you want to make sure that at least the bottom 3 feet of the branches are not touching the ground, to prevent what's called laddering. So if you would have a grass fire come in per se, and it caught those branches on fire, it could take that fire up to the crown of the tree, and then those embers would, you know, go off and potentially start additional fires. And it's also really important to eliminate any debris below those trees that you're keeping in this space of 5 feet from your home. So I just thought I'd bring up fencing at this point too, which I hear is kind of a hot topic, no pun intended. But you know, wooden fencing, if it catches on fire, can act like matchsticks, right? It can create paths for fuels to connecting homes, just to completely catch on fire and catch your neighbors' houses on fire. So it's really important to replace, you know, wooden gates with non-combustible material. Optionally, it's best to anything that's 5 to 8 feet that's attached to your home. It's really important to remove those wooden gates and replace them with something that's not combustible. That could also be, you have a fence that it's just attached to your home. It's really important to try to bring that defensible space out. At least 5 to 8 feet is best away from your home with any non-combustible material. So Wildlife Partners had suggested to me that it's really a great idea to keep 3 feet of on either side of your fences, right? So your fence, your neighbor's fence, and keep it clear of all wood mulch and any type of debris, right? So that would mean, you know, trimming back any shrubs that might be that close to the fence, to the wood fence, and any leaves that might accumulate there, any type of you know, vegetation and debris that could accumulate near your wood fence. It's really good to keep that defensible space within 3 feet of that. Another suggestion was that if you do have a lot of wood fencing and, you know, it gets expensive. So it might be something that you could do is you could cut off those, the lower 6 to 12 inches of the wooden fencing and replace it with either, you know, a screen mesh so that the embers don't accumulate there, or some sort of corrugated metal. And, you know, this brings up a topic I know right now with HOAs that, you know, there are facts out there that the Marshall Fire, some of the wooden fences caught fire and the firefighters had to knock them over so that they could, you know, try to save other people's homes, because the fences just caught on fire and acted like, you know, a match catalyst. So it's a conversation to definitely bring up and have with your HOAs, that Firewise fence options should not be available, especially if you're having to rebuild at this point. So below you can see some fence options. We've got corrugated fence on the left. In the middle, we've got a beautiful metal gate and fencing between the two houses. And then you also have non-combustible fencing materials as well. So plant materials in zone 1, and we're going to be talking about specific plant materials later in the presentation, but this is a zone, I brought this up now because this zone is really crucial. If you're going to have any plants in this zone up next to your house, you really want to make sure it's the most fire resistant, non-flammable, high moisture content plants that you can get right there, which are, you know, a lot of low growing ground covers or compact materials. You can see in these photos, there's hens and chicks and succulents have a lot of high moisture content. And so those would be okay to use near your home. But again, you need to make sure that your plant material is really well maintained. You need to make sure that any vegetation that is dead or dying be removed, and that they should all be watered regularly, because healthy plants are definitely less flammable. So, and also keep in mind that, you know, any plant has the potential to be flammable under the right conditions. So I know that Boulder County right now is recommending, West Boulder County anyway, is recommending that there be no plant materials planted within this first 5 feet of your home. Just use gravel chip or hardscape materials. So this is an image of a good representation of defensible space, right, before and after. So the photo on the left, obviously they had a lot of conifers within that first 5 to 8 feet of their home. And on the image on the right, you could see how the Forest Service, or to whomever came in and eliminated a lot of those trees that were potential ignition that could ignite that house, right? Now, where they have the firewood placed, I would say might be a little bit close, but maybe that's them starting out, right? Just to eliminate the trees, and they're stacking the firewood there before they move it. And something I just want to say too, that, you know, this information can be overwhelming with all these new statistics and everything, not new statistics, but with all this information. And, you know, baby steps are good. They're better than nothing, right? So really think about that first 5 to 8 feet of your home, you know, your combustible space, where you're storing firewood and anything that might be combustible. So now we'll move ahead to zone 2, which is considered, you know, 5 feet to 30 feet from the furthest point of your structures. Here you want to really make sure that you're looking at your landscape so that you can reduce any intensity of an approaching fire. So you can see on this graphic how, you know, in the 5 to 30 feet zone, you have plants, you have trees that are being incorporated, you have hardscape that's being incorporated, but within that 5 to 30 feet zone is not a huge concentration of anything that could be potentially ignited. So again, you know, in the image below, you can see how they've used low water, high moisture content plantings that are closer to their home. And then they have a large hardscape walkway, which could be considered, you know, defensible space and a fire break. So that if there is a potential of a fire coming in, that having hardscape surrounding your vegetable, your ornamental garden beds can help to reduce the fire from spreading and or spreading so quickly. So the first thing, you know, you want to remember is that, you know, always use fire resistant materials in this zone. But any potential for fires could be, you know, your wood decking, your firewood. People don't really think about doormats and patio furniture. Maybe some of your planters, if they're not being well taken care of, could possibly ignite, and any type of, you know, propane barbecue that's really close to your home. You want to think about where that's being positioned. You know, especially on high fire days, if there's warnings for that, you might be thinking about bringing patio furniture cushions maybe in your garage or something, or removing some of that stuff as an example. So tree canopies surrounding your structure should be at least 10 feet from the structure, further if it's on a slope. And there's some more information in the resources section as well on that. Actually, a well-watered lawn, you know, can act as a great defensible space. But you want to make sure that you're watering lawns and mowing them low, and don't let them become dry, right? Again, well-watered plant materials are better fire resistant. So you want to make sure, again, in this zone, you're removing all of your dead plant material. So you've got to keep out there. For those of you who really like to keep, this is kind of where your personal aesthetics come in, right? With design, is that if you're using ornamental grasses and you're using, let's just say, any cone flowers that you like to leave up in the winter time for pollinators and birds to come in to eat, you know, you need to think about that, and whether or not you want to keep those up in the winter time and during fire season, or once they've become dormant, do you want to cut those down? So back to trees. Trees should be limbed up 6 to 10 feet from the ground surface with no dry grass below. And again, that's to prevent any type of laddering of the fuels going up that tree and igniting the crowns of the trees, which could then potentially spread those embers around the property or to other homes. Really important to choose fire resistant plant materials in this zone, still water regularly and keep them well maintained. And also we're going to get into a little bit about mulch in this presentation as well. So you really want to consider non-organic mulch. So gravel or chip mulch versus wood mulch, especially within the first 15 feet of your home. And I've thrown in a mulch slide here, which was a test for how well wood mulch burns. This is through the city of Ashland, Oregon, who they've done a lot of really great research on defensible space and what products work. And again, that's a part of some resources in your section in the back. So they call it the real dirt on wood mulch. So the wood mulch burn tests. So what they found out is that your large chunky mulch burns really quickly, and it's highly flammable, and it is not recommended. So along with that, fine grain mulch, so like your gorilla mulch that a lot of people like, ignites very quickly. So you want to make sure that if you're using that type of mulch, you're using it at least 15 feet away from your structures. The test said that finely ground mulch, or they call it compost mulch, I don't know if it resists burning, but it will burn at a less higher ignition rate. So it is actually a safer option to use, but again, you still want to use that like 10 to 15 feet away from your home or your structures. So they suggest, you've got examples here of using like brick or mulch pavers, flagstone. They say that bare dirt works pretty good, and then that you could add, crushed granite or some rock chip on top of that. So again, it's a part of your aesthetics of what you prefer to use versus what the experts are saying. So one thing you want to think about also when you're designing is designing for what's called fuel breaks. So if a fire is coming through your property, you want to slow that flow of the fire, right? And you want to break up the potential for fuels to continue, right? So that's what's called a fuel break. And you can do that with hardscape materials, also with lawns. In this example, you've got walkways, you've got retaining walls, a driveway is considered a fuel break. Even dry stream beds and water features can be considered a fuel break. So you want to think about that when you're incorporating a new landscape design in your plans. And also plants should be arranged so that they're in smaller groups rather than in large beds, so that it breaks up the fuels, right? So if you've got a huge concentration of plants and that ignites, it's best to have some defensible space around that, right? So either a lawn that is well mowed and well irrigated, or you could put in, again, walkways, paths, dry stream beds, and retaining walls. So that's an opportunity for everybody to get a little creative with how we want to create some fuel breaks. So again, in this zone, you want to consider clustering your trees and shrubs into smaller groups rather than, hedges. You want to be able to keep space between your plants so that the fuels do not have an opportunity to get large and spread. It's okay to use a mixture of deciduous trees with conifers, but you want to use them, again, it's not just the plants, it's how you're placing the plants. You can see in this photograph that there's two large deciduous trees, but they've got, the crowns aren't touching. So if one tree would ignite, firefighters have an opportunity to put that tree out before hopefully it would ignite onto another tree. So one thing you want to think about as well in this space is, once you're cutting down your plant debris, you want to make sure that you get rid of that debris off your site and compost it. Not on your site, but so that you don't have a lot of dead and dry timber and debris on your property. All right, so that's state zone number 3. Now we're going to be going into a wider, most of you may not even have 30 to 100 feet of yard on your property. But this is an area where you really want to remove heat and movement of flames. And it's a really great opportunity to collaborate, with your extended neighbors to make sure that your properties are well maintained and cleaned up. So it's really important, like I'd mentioned, to break up the paths of the fires, right? And so that they don't spread. So spacing of the trees is important. You can see in this diagram, they're suggesting that any trees, like we talked about, be at least 5 feet away from the home. And then trees in the surrounding zones have the correct footage around them so that there is not the potential of trees igniting and catching other trees on fire, right? So with that, it's important that your trees don't overhang or touch the ground or touch lower shrubs, right? So that can create what's called those laddering fuels. And we'll get into that a little bit more too here. So again, keep your ground litter clean of dead branches, any pine needles, twigs, leaves. And again, go through and remove any dead plant and tree material and small conifers that might be starting to grow in between mature trees, because those could ignite your mature trees. So this is another graphic that you can see as you move farther away from the home structures, you're able to have more vegetation, right? And it's okay, again, like I said, to have a mixture of deciduous and conifer trees, as long as you allow space in between. Again, you want to control unwanted and dry vegetation. But this area that's, maybe might bud up to open space, we might call this the natural area of your property. It's really important to have that space, to invite habitat for insects and wildlife and birds. So if you can control that area by getting rid of debris, anything dead and drying, that would greatly help the fire ignition in that area. And there is statistics that say, to select conifers can be trimmed out so that you still have trees, you still have shade, you still have that vegetation back there. But if they're looking like they're struggling or they're too close together, strategically moving any type of flammable conifer is important in this area. And again, firewood or propane tanks should be stored at least 30 feet from your structures, and even more if you're on a slope. So this is an example of a fire ladder. So it's important, you can see in this graphic that the shrubs below or the grasses below had caught on fire, which then caught the higher or the taller plants on fire, which then brought it to the tops of the trees, which is called laddering, right? So that's something that you want to avoid. So wherever you can, you really want to clean out that horizontal space below the trees. You want to limb up the trees 6 to 15 feet from the ground. Make sure that all the grasses, if there's any grass below those trees and shrubs, that the grasses are mowed to like 3 to 4 inches beneath the conifers. And you should really, move those small shrubs and small trees from underneath taller trees to avoid creating those ladder fuels. Okay, we can go ahead and take some questions now about what we just talked about with defensible space. And then when we come back, we'll talk about plants and other Firewise landscaping principles.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, that's a lot of information, I know.
No, it's great. We've been getting a lot of great questions about just in general resources and whatnot. So
Great.
Again, great reminder that we'll be sending some of those out, and that
Yes.
Chris will be available for any lingering questions via email.
Yeah. And I'm just going to point out here that on this graphic that I'm using here to pause for questions, you can see, how far out your propane tank is. You can see that you still have a very desirable landscape that's functional and usable, that has lots of vegetation on it. But I think it's a really great graphic. I put it in here because it really does help you to visualize, this defensible space that we're talking about, and how it's segmented, right? From 0 to 5 feet, right next to your home, versus the 5 to 30 feet and then beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very helpful, and actually kind of leads to the first question.
Okay.
So someone was talking a lot about smaller lots, specifically fewer than, less than 7,000 square feet. How can you address, or how do you address small lot landscaping with some of these principles that require quite a bit of space?
Right. So I would say, when you when you meet with your landscape professional, really look at your particular space, right? Because if your house is very, very close to your neighbors, that's going to, your defensible space is going to be different, right? You really need to think about where you're going to be maybe putting that shade tree, because it might shade you, but it might be in your neighbor's, on your neighbor's roof line or fence line, right? Which could ignite, right? So, again, yes, small lots are a challenge, because we all want to have our our shade and our places to relax and enjoy nature. So it really is going to depend. It really is site specific. So I would say, with smaller spaces, think about that first 5 to 8 feet right next to your home. And then also really think about the plants that you're going to be putting in there and the trees that you're going to be putting in there. It might be with a smaller space that you have to consider not putting any conifers in there, right? Because those are the most ignitable trees.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, thank you. Let's see. So, how would you recommend implementing some of these principles with a significant slope? You've mentioned the slope a couple times. How do you go about kind of that big challenge of having a sloped yard?
Right. Well, there are guidelines for, if you've got slope, you've got to have more defensible space and stuff like that. So it really is dependent on your individual space. There is some guidelines in here on the resources page for when you're working with a slope. Because when you're on a slope, if that fire starts below, it's going to come uphill. So you have to space out your trees and everything more. So again, it's really site specific, but there are some guidelines in the resources section that I included. And I think that's under the, when we get to that page, I'll try to remember to point that out. I think it's the Boulder County defensible space.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So within zone 0, zone 1, I believe, I found it really interesting just that so much of it can just be moving the propane, moving the wood, kind of just some of those
Yeah,
kind of low hanging fruit.
right.
Have any take on fake grass in that area? And if that's
Yeah. Having a well-watered lawn, and that doesn't mean over watering your lawn, but having a lawn that is green and healthy is okay to have next to your house for sure. Within that first 5-8 feet of your zone, you wouldn't want to put lawn like right next to your home, because if your irrigation breaks, then you could have flooding problems. So I'd stay away from that. But yeah, lawns are okay. And again, it depends on your aesthetics, because a lot of us are trying to remove our lawn and we don't want to have a lawn. So, that type of thing. But ornamental grasses in general, if they're beautiful, but I think, and I'm not saying that you can't use them. I think you just have to use them a little bit more sparingly. And you really have to say, okay, when they go dormant, maybe you need to cut them down. Right. So
you mentioned quite a few, the non-organic mulches in terms of gravel and whatnot, but if would you advise against a fake ornamental grass or like a fake turf?
Artificial turf. Yes, I would not put that anywhere within your first 5 feet of your home. Okay. Maybe 8, maybe even more than that.
Okay, great.
That is something I actually, that's a really good question, and I'll try to see if I can come up with some more if there's any statistics out there for that. But I know that artificial turf can be flammable depending on what it's made of. Right. I'm actually working with a client right now who's using a company that they say it is not flammable. So that's, one thing I want to say about this presentation and all this information is it is a boatload of information, and there's not any one source that you can go to get this information. I mean, I pulled this information from a plethora of resources, not only in our state, but Idaho and Oregon. And so as we learn, more information, that information becomes more available, right? So there's always going to be more updates coming up. So I would just ask, tell everybody to stay informed with the county. I'm going to be posting on my website as well, anything that I know that's new, that's updated, and any questions that people have that I can't, answer today, they're free to email me, which that'll be on the ending slide too. So yeah, where there's a lot of us who are doing this work, we're educating ourselves on a daily basis sometimes with new information. And I will say that Idaho Firewise I just attended a webinar, an in-person talk with them, and they have done a lot of testing for mulches and plantings and defensible zone spaces. So they're a great resource.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. And also, I would say, yeah, the artificial turf brings up, a lot of,
Yeah, and we do know that they are, someone just made a great comment too, that, they are pollinator deserts. So yeah, it's
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I have issues with it personally, but that's not why you came to this webinar. So yeah.
All right, do you have time for one more?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Okay. Let's see. Many resources suggest pine or straw mulch specifically for vegetable gardening. Do you agree? And if so, or does it have to be past the 15 feet away from the house mark?
I would say yes. You really need to think about that. Those zones that are right next to your house, and then, and I don't know a definite answer to that, but that's my first, inkling is to say that. But, when you're vegetable gardening, your straw that you would be using too would probably be saturated because you're watering on a regular basis. So I would say once you harvest, and I would get rid of that plant material too, because it's going to be dry, and then maybe you want to compost that straw at the end of the growing season and get rid of it, so that it's not there, during the fire season.
Great. Yeah, that's a great point.
Grass clippings can work really great for mulch too in your vegetable gardens, but
yeah, keeping
those will dry out
right
as well. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So really more about the placement rather. I think your point too, that any plant, even if low flammability still can be
It could be it could be combustible. And then also, you need to think about what you're building your raised beds out of as well.
Yeah.
And
will you have any resources about fencing companies who really use Firewise materials, or any suggestions on where to go for that?
Oh, yeah, in the resources section, the city of Ashland, Oregon had a lot of really great material choices to use. So I did include that in the resources page. Yeah, that's another great, the city of Ashland, Oregon is another great municipality who has a really great amount of resources for Firewise.
Great. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. We can keep moving if that works.
All right, I'm going to have a drink of water here. All right, so this is kind of the fun part of the presentation, I guess, or not so daunting. So, again, I'm going to say that any plant can burn under the right conditions. And, as we know, the Marshall Fire was just really unprecedented. That what I've read, what I've heard from, firefighters is that, any of this defensible space that maybe you had already created was null and void because of the type of fire that it was. So, but, in choosing plants, you want to choose so for all your zones, you want to look at the type of plant it is. Does it have a high moisture content or does it have a high flammability content? So, CSU Extension just put out a new I think they call it low flammability. They call it low flammability landscape plant list that was just revised in April of 2023. So that's a new updated version, which is really great. And also Idaho Firewise has a great plethora of plant lists that you can use. At least get you started, right? If you want to replace some plants, but again, it's not just choosing Firewise plants, it's how you're placing them and where you're placing them and how you're combining them together as well. So just in general, you want to make sure that any plants you use that are Firewise are well maintained, remove the dead. Native plants are super well adapted to our climate and, are highly recommended. They're drought tolerant and require less water. They're tough. They're resilient to changing climates, which, we have a changing climate this year with all the rain we've got. Native plants resist disease and pests, and they're non-invasive, and they are very habitat friendly. So now we're going to specifically talk about plants in zone 1. I had mentioned a little bit earlier that I just found out today that actually West Boulder County is requesting that no planting actually be done in zone 1. So I think that might mean if you are in a more forested area, right, and very much more prone to fires, they're asking that you don't plant anything in that first 5 feet right next to your home. So I thought I'd just put that out there. But in general, for those of us who live in, urban areas, low growing, high moisture content plants, as you can see in some of these examples, those are succulents and ground covers that are on the roof there, and some low growing plants on the bottom. Take a look at the Firewise plant lists as well. Again, rock mulch and hardscape materials are really important in that zone 1 area. Also, it's really important to have a diversity of plants, right? So that if, let's say that you, for some reason, your, I'm just going to say your coneflowers or your succulents right now are blooming and they're in that kind of, fading out dormant stage. If those might be more prone to burn at a particular time, if you have a diversity of plants, then maybe the ones right next to those plants aren't going to burn and you can stifle that fire more quickly, right? So planting a diversity of plants rather than having them in large masses is important. Again, you want to trim all trees 10 feet from the roof or the chimney. Zone 1, I would say just eliminate the conifers as you can. Again, think of this as baby steps too. If you're retrofitting a house to be more fire resistant, think of it as baby steps and start with that first zone. Remove also any debris or anything that you're storing right next to that zone 1. So here's a few plant suggestions for zone 1 plantings. In the first image there, this is a native poppy mallow. We've got some ground covers, Turkish veronica, which you can see blend really nicely with your hardscaping materials, and you can walk on that. We've got ice plants, which there's all types of ice plants and sedums and delospermas and that flower and grow really nicely in between rocks and boulders, which you would be having in zone 1. You've got some creeping phlox in there. You've got other succulents. So a plethora of colors and textures are available. So in your zone 2 plants, Again, we always want to be thinking about Firewise, Waterwise, and drought tolerant plants. Deciduous trees and shrubs. I wrote no conifers, but I think if you put some conifers in and had defensible space around that, and maybe you had some lawn around those, that you would be okay. But I would keep those as furthest away from your home or structure as possible. Again, keep the plants well maintained and remove them. So maintenance, you can see I'm talking about that a lot as well. It's not just planting the plants and letting them go. You really need to keep an eye on how they're growing and maintaining. A plan a diversity of plants. Again, you want to design for fuel breaks so that you've got your plants grouped in small groupings, or islands they're called, rather than continuous hedges, so that if by chance some of those plants might ignite, you've got space in between those so that you can contain the fire. Again, it's really to your advantage to use downspouts to your advantage. You keep that water on your property, not running down your driveway or running down the sidewalk. Your water from your downspouts can help to water your trees and create rain gardens, which are gardens that are near downspouts and things, or a depression area that water can come in and retain and percolate down, and the plants that you put in there are adapted for that type of irrigation. So I'm going to talk a little bit also about maintaining your irrigation. It's well-watered landscapes are Firewise landscapes. So you want to make sure that your irrigation, system is working and running to keep your plants healthy, and make sure that your hose bibs are, if a firefighter had to come in, or there was a grass fire that came, on your property or your neighbor's property, that you could have a hose attached and get to that hose bib and possibly put out that ground fire, right? And again, we're going to talk about using gravel chip versus wood mulch within the first 15 feet of your home. So some examples of perennials that you could use in zone 2. And again, this is just a small snippet of what you could be using. The CSU extension resource list is a great valued information, as well as Idaho Firewise as well. So we've got various penstemons, which is in the first picture. We've got your native blanket flower, which you can see is bringing in your pollinators. We've got hummingbird trumpets. On the bottom, we've got a ground cover called sulfur flower, which is great for growing in between boulders and in between your walkways. Bee balm is another great plant that brings in native pollinators. And then you've got your native golden banner as well, which is good for areas that have a little bit of shade and require a little bit more moisture, maybe from your downspouts. And again, just some trees and shrubs, service berries are great in the tree form, which is what you're seeing here on the first picture, which is autumn brilliant service berry. There's also various service berry shrubs that work really well in the landscape. On the top middle picture, you've got a low growing ground cover shrub called autumn amber sumac. And below that is the native snowberry. And on the right hand side, you can get some fragrance with shrubs by using Cheyenne mock orange. So again, in zone 3, so you're creating fuel breaks with hardscape materials. If you're on a slope, as in this picture here, you've got boulders and you've got plants spaced out so that it's not continual touching plants in that area. It's okay to use larger plants in the zone 3 area, but make sure that you space out your shrubs and your trees, and you want to make sure that you don't have those shrubs right underneath your trees that could create your ladder fuels. Your tree canopies, again, should be between 12 and 15 feet apart. again, with smaller properties, you definitely want to be considerate of your neighbors. Are you putting that tree in a situation or in a spot that could potentially be a hazard for your neighbors? And again, we don't need to talk about mulch anymore, but it is okay to actually use a little bit of that fine wood chip mulch, farther away from your home. So think about that. I know that I'll just put in a plug here for wood mulch, that, by using local arborists mulch is a great opportunity to be sustainable and to use mulch that's, might normally go into maybe, the dump or something like that. But a fine wood mulch can work really well in a Firewise landscape when it's farther away than 15 feet from your home. Okay, some shrubs and trees for zone 3 area. Here is a really beautiful plant called 7 sunflower, which you can see blooms with, it has white blooms, but then those blooms turn into these red sepals, or they last through the, I think they start in summertime and last through the fall on that particular tree. On the bottom, you've got nice native shrubs such as the 3-leaf sumac, which provides habitat for wildlife and insects, as well as giving you 4-season interest in the landscape and fall color. And then on the right is a tree called, it's a choke cherry, but is one that does not sucker, so that it is called sucker punch choke cherry. And you can see the beautiful purple leaves there, and it has white, very fragrant flowers in the spring. All great for pollinators, all of those. Some other examples of Firewise trees are the big tooth maple. So this is our native maple, the Acer grandidentatum. We talked about serviceberries. Hawthorns are a great Firewise tree, honey locusts, and crab apples. So some plants that you want to avoid. So this is a fire resistant plant chart that I thought was really interesting that Idaho Firewise put out, and you can see that succulents and ground covers have the most fire resistant turf grasses. And then the least fire resistant are your conifers. So again, it's not saying that you can't use conifers, but just use them with caution. Don't use them within the first zone of your home. If you're going to use them in zone 2, push them, a little farther away from your structure, but be mindful of your neighbors. So anything with a high resin content, so that would be your conifers. The big western sagebrush and rabbit brush are highly flammable, but again, you could think about using those depending on where you're going to be placing those in zone 3, as well as your conifers in zone 3. Arborvitaes are highly flammable. Ornamental grasses we talked about. So if you want to leave those up in the winter, you might want to think about cutting those down when they go dormant. Any type of broom is flammable. And again, think about vines and plants that might be attached to your pergola, or an arbor that's attached to your home, right? That would be a flammable plant that you would want to avoid. Another place where you want to think about avoiding plants is adjacent to siding, right? Underneath your vents or eaves, within 5 feet of your decks. You want to avoid, think about what types of plants that you're using there. And just to speak one more thing about decks too, is like, it's really important not to store anything under your deck, because that's where debris accumulates, and that's where embers a lot of time can accumulate. So you want to refrain from storing things underneath your deck. Once again, tree limbs over the roof, you want to cut those back 10 feet. that might be touching your chimney or power lines. So I'm just going to recap a few things here about, excuse me, about creating fire resistant designs. Again, this is a lot of information, so please take this information, review it with your people whom you live with, right, to make some educated decisions, and also educate your neighbors about defensible space. So, it's a big discussion that you're going to want to have with your landscape professional and with yourselves, or with your home builder too, if they're doing some of this work, to discuss your what's your comfort level. A lot of people really are like the whoever was asking the question about the vegetable gardens, that if those might be close to your house, what is the appropriate mulch material, and you have to be comfortable with the decisions that you make. So have fun and incorporate what your passion and ethics are about sustainability, creating year-round habitat, creating pollinator habitat, while really thinking about the plants that you could be using. There's a lot of plants on this list that are native plants that bring in pollinators, and I'm not going to say just all native plants are great, because the slide previous we were talking about rabbit brush, which is a native plant, is highly ignitable. So you want to really look at those lists and know what you're incorporating and installing in your landscape. Again, take a look at your insurance policy too. If you are starting from scratch with your landscape, take a look at your insurance policy and see if they have any limitations with your landscaping and what you should be putting in case you have any future claims. I'm going to say again, it's really important to collaborate with your neighbors, especially if you have smaller spaced homes, or smaller yards and homes close together. You could share a tree location on both properties that could work fine for you. Think about connecting front yard gardens and habitats. So what I mean by that is, those of you who are starting from scratch, your neighbors are probably starting from scratch too, right? Or even if you're retrofitting front yards, there's a lot of us now who are trying to remove lawn in the front and put in gardens in a box designs and habitat gardens. And it's really important that pollinators have as many connecting gardens or corridors together as they can for food. A lot of our pollinators can't fly very far for food. So by connecting your front yards, you're creating more habitat, and you're creating something exciting for yourself as well. So also I'm just going to say that, it's important to keep up with your HOA, any updates and community updates, and to be a voice for your HOA too, right? We want to be able to install these fire resistant designs without any pushback from the HOA. So again, I'm just going to kind of recap. You want to remove any flammable debris 5 feet from all your structures and foundations. So that's your garages, your sheds, your carports, your homes. Store firewood and propane 30 feet away from the structures, or as far away from your structures as you can, without putting your neighbors into jeopardy with that. Clean the corners of your structures, and every once in a while you're going to need to get up and clean those pine needles out of your gutters, because that's combustible material. Use fire resistant materials for decking, and do not store anything under your decks. That's where a lot of fires start, is the embers come in underneath the deck and there's debris, or people store firewood and other things under there. So consider fire resistant materials for your fences and gates, and anything in your pergolas, anything that's attached to your home. And I'm going to put a plug out here to think about, your emergency responders too. it's really important that your house address be visible so that your firefighters or emergency responders can locate those quickly. And give firefighters easy access to your property. Leave your gates unlocked and maintain water sources. So make sure that they could get to a hose bib if they needed to, or any fire hydrants. And I would say, as far as, thinking about this as baby steps too, if you've got hazardous vegetation close to your home, go ahead and start by replacing that. And it's also important then in the summer and the fall and during the dry winters, it's really important to water your trees and keep them healthy. A lot of our trees dry out during the winter time, especially conifers, because of the winds that we get, and that just dries them out. Also, don't dump any of your plant debris into wildlands or vacant lots, because those can become ignition points. And it's really important to, keep your irrigation system maintained, right? Because maintaining your irrigation system is going to mean you have a healthy lawn and you have healthy plants, and healthy plants all mean that it's less ignitable. And access to any emergency water supplies, your hose bibs, and fire hydrants. And something that got pointed out to me by someone at Wildfire Partners was that, it's really important that I not send the message that if there's a fire, if there is a impending fire close by, don't turn on your irrigation system, because it could deplete water from that's needed for firefighting, right? So again, but if you're irrigating your yard and your plantings on a regular basis, and they're healthy and they're maintained, and you're using Firewise plants, then you should be fine. And somewhere I read this, which I thought was a good idea, that it could be helpful to have, if you live in an area that you have a lot of, grass or natural grasslands, like right behind your home or open space, to keep a hose attached to your hose bib. If there were by chance a ground fire, you might be able to assist in putting that out before it becomes a tragedy. So maintain trees and woody plants, by pruning out dead, dying branches, remove any branches that hang over the roof, mow grass and weeds within 30 feet of the house, at least for 4 inches or less. Avoid creating continuous planting beds, right? So there's some defensible space and fire breaks in between those beds, and avoid creating those ladder fields where your lower plants might ignite. Your grasses, your shrubs, your trees could ignite and spread that fire up to the tops of your trees. Install fuel breaks with hardscape material, and think about, choosing your mulch very wisely. So here's a list of resources. And again, if any of you have questions that I'm not able to answer tonight, or that you don't see in this list, you'll have my email address that you can email me, and I'll do my best to find you any type of resource to help you out with that. But Colorado State University has a great amount of information out there for their extension fact sheets, right? So that's where you're going to find your low flammability landscape plant list. You're going to find fact sheets on fire resistant landscaping, which will reiterate a lot of the things that I've been saying. Colorado State Forest Service has a great a plethora of information for wildfires, and they really deal a lot with more mountain homes and stuff like that too. Colorado Green Building Guild has a Marshall Fires resources list, which I found helpful. And then I mentioned a few times Wildfire Partners of Boulder County is a program to help homeowners mitigate their properties and prepare for wildfire. thinking that that's inevitable. So they'll help you prepare your home as best they can. Lewis, so sorry, let me go back to one more time. So in Boulder County in Louisville, there's a community wildfire protection plan for Boulder and Louisville that I added with this. The town of Castle Rock has a really great community wildfire protection plan that might not just be for anybody to, it's probably got 100 pages or something like that, but I found some really useful information in there. And then again, as I've said, Firewise Idaho has just a great plethora of information that's really helpful, and they organize it in useful terms that's easy to understand. So again, I'm Chris Woods, and I'm the owner of Woods Landscape Design. I'm the principal designer here. We are available to answer any questions that you have. My email is at the bottom there, chris@woodslandscapedesign.com. And I'm available to help. I'm very much believe that we work with community and we help each other out, and we'll get through. And thank you all very much for attending. And I hope you all aren't overwhelmed with all the information, but we're here to help. So thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Chris. That was incredible. I learned so much about a lot of things I haven't thought of yet, mostly like actions you can take, less so.
Yeah, there's a lot of like things that you don't really think of, like, oh yeah, those grass, mats out in my front door. If it's a high fire day, maybe I should bring that in.
Yeah, and turning off your sprinkler in case of a fire.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I was thinking just the opposite, but then I was like, yeah, it's going to deplete the water. So yeah, I hope some of those pointers help out.
Absolutely. Well, we'll go through a few more questions if you've
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
So we had a lot of questions about fire resistant decking material and fencing. I know you mentioned it briefly and said you have a few resources coming out. And again, I want to remind everyone that resource page will be emailed. But can you just briefly kind of cover a few of the best fire resistant decking materials, and specifically if there's anything to coat current decks with?
Coding. That's interesting. I actually don't know any information about that. So if there's anybody out there that's a builder that could help out with that would be greatly appreciated, because I don't know of that. Because replacing it it's very expensive. So again, you really need to think about your comfort zone and your aesthetics and your budget and everything, So I don't know decking materials in particular, but I will take a look for that and try to get that out to you guys before you send out this survey with other resources. So I will make a note of that to try and find some. And again, if there's any home builders on the webinar right now that could help out with that would be terrific.
Yeah, and you can send, if anyone does have information about that, you can send anything to our garden info email that I've included in the chat, gardeninfo@resourcecentral.org, and we'll pass it along to Chris.
Great.
And then in terms of just Firewise deck materials, aside from kind of what you mentioned in the presentation.
Yeah, and I don't know specifically of any brand, that's better than another. I would say that if you have an option of putting in, flagstone or concrete, those materials are, they last for a really long time too. So you might get more bang for your buck by doing that, because it's not just going to be a decking material. Because I know even like some of the trucks materials can be fire resistant, but they're not non-combustible. And I think that if with the right amount of heat and fire, that decking material could still ignite. I am not certain of that, and so I don't know specifically deck materials, but that's something that I want to look into and get a resource for you guys.
Okay, great. And it looks like someone commented Fiberone and Timber Tech have fire resistant decking. Fiberone and Timber Tech.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So let's see. What is non-organic chip mulch made of?
So chip mulch can be a combination of, it could be crushed gravel, it could be crushed granite, it could be crushed flagstone. So, if you go to a materials center, they, I don't want to name any names, any vendors, but they usually have different varieties that you can choose from.
Great.
Yeah. And some of them are, are definitely more costly than others. It just depends on, how it would match to your architecture of your home and what you like. I wouldn't, pea gravel is one of those choices that you could put it around your home, but it's not great to walk on because it's like walking on marbles. but it does work great in beds.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So you did mention crab apples, but are there any other fruit or nut trees that are also Firewise?
Oh, I think fruit trees in general are okay because they contain pectin, right? So
Right.
meaning they would have like high moisture as well.
Okay.
So any high moisture plant is good. So I think you're good with fruit trees.
Cool. Awesome. Another comment here about ignition resistant decking. It looks like there are standards about this in the Boulder County Building Code. So thank you all for that information. We did also get information about, let's see, individuals can claim a subtraction on their Colorado income tax for certain costs incurred in wildfire mitigation on their property, up
Great.
to $500 a year. And I will drop the link to that in the chat in just a moment. So thank you for that. Let's see. What are the most dangerous months of the year for wildfires in Colorado? I don't know if you know that.
I'm hoping there's a firefighter on this webinar to help us out with that, because I think that the December fire, Marshall Fire, was not a time that we normally get, wildfire. So, yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but I know I can get you an answer to that to put in the,
Great. Awesome.
and get back to you with that for sure.
Wonderful.
On a typical, I'd say, we're looking at, when it's dry, August, September.
Right. Sure. That was dry fall months. This may be a little tough to answer, but is there an average cost range when consulting with a master designer for a typical suburban house, like a cost per square foot? How do you kind of know you're within the normal range of a landscape design for price?
Sure. And then that, it's difficult to answer that because it really depends on the scope of work that you're doing. Do you have a slope? Does it need to be retained? What type of hardscape materials are you going to use? So when you consult with your landscape professional, maybe on your first, talk at your property, on your site visit, they should be able to give you a range of, for example, they could tell you that this hardscape is more expensive than this hardscape, right? In general, which could help you figure out, okay, and some costs per square foot. They can definitely give you some of that when you're reviewing your conceptual designs before you get to the final master plan. They can tell you some, wide ranges of, or some rough ranges of what that installation is going to cost.
Okay, great. And someone did just comment here, just reiterating what you just mentioned, that every month, of course, has seen fires, especially in Boulder County, but fall is probably the most fire prone in recent years, of course, due to the dryness.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you for that.
Lots of good information in here. Just look through. Okay. Yeah. Are HICS-U in terms of Firewise, being Firewise, where does that land on the spectrum?
use, yeah, I'll check that one out. Let me check here on the Firewise if they have that even on here. I can try to look that up and get
Yeah,
that.
no problem.
I know that arborvitaes are flammable.
We also had a just so you know, a great comment given how rainy it was this year that it might require more aggressive mowing and specifically just obviously shrub removal and dry grass removal. This is kind of a tough one, but if you back up to an unmitigated natural open space, aside from really picking up brush, is there much else that you can do to clean that space up?
I would say that, is that property owned by you or is it open space like by the county?
It's like by the
It's
county.
open space by the county, right? Well, they can't obviously get out to mitigate or mow everything, right? So I would say that doing things like, observing that space to see is there dried or dead wood, right? You could contact the county to let them know, hey, I'm observing this and I'm concerned about that. You could try to remove some of that yourselves or have your neighbors, do some of that. And then again, I would say maybe by keeping that, keeping a hose on your hose bib, if you saw anything ignite, maybe there's a chance to put it out before a grass fire does occur. And other than that, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I would say that maybe someone from Boulder County Open Space could answer that in more detail.
That would be my suggestion as well.
Yeah.
Especially given just how wet it's been this year, that things
Yeah.
elevated than normal.
Yeah. I mean, my house backs up to, it's not open space, but it's a large ditch area, which can get really, really dry. So we're just really trying to keep it mowed. And I know if you back up to open space, you really can't, go out and do that on your own. But I would say just observe and be aware.
Sure.
And try to get out anything that's dead that you can.
Yeah. And it looks like U is on Ashland, Oregon's highly flammable list.
Great. Thank you for whoever saw that. Yeah.
Thank you. Do you know of any resources for removing large established trees, specifically like grants for removing fire fuel? And I did put again that link for the tax incentive, but obviously tree removal is quite expensive. So
sure. You may contact Wildfire Partners to see if they have any resources for that. Because I don't know if how much work they actually do versus just advising, right? But that's a really great question because you're in a situation where you want to do the right thing, but it's very cost prohibitive a lot of times. So, it would be great to have some, if there were some county incentives for removing, conifers that are, in that zone that you want to remove.
Yeah. And we did get a comment about Wildfire Partners primarily has programs for houses in mountain areas. They have not yet launched program for East County, but it does sound like, again, in terms of just getting some information and resources, that they may be a good place to start.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Okay, I think that kind of gets us kind of right up to time. Chris, I cannot thank you enough. This has been incredibly informative. And again, everyone, this big list of resources will be coming out to you all shortly. And if we did not get to your question tonight, I'm documenting them all and sending them to our team, which of course will be passed along to Chris. And she will include any additional information in the follow-up email. And her information is here should you reach out directly to her as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. And I wish you all the best of luck. And again, think of it as think of it as, you know, doing what you can initially and growing out from there, right? Because anything you can do to mitigate the, you know, your home from burning is going to be a step forward, right? So I know, because it's a lot of information and it can sound really costly. So baby steps. Yeah.
Baby steps for sure. And I
Yeah.
will pass off a little bit more information that has just popped up here.
Oh, yes. Mhm.
Want to definitely confirm all of these, but it looks like the city of Louisville, you are able to mow 10 feet behind your house into open space owned by the city. I would definitely check your specific area and make sure you're within the city limits, but that's good to know. And it looks like Wildfire Partners has told that they are starting a chipping program free for residents mitigation. I'm not sure in exactly what area that is, but that is a great place to start and look into.
A chipping program of the trees that are coming down.
Yeah, looks like
Yeah,
it.
like they're creating their own mulch.
Yeah, free for
Yeah,
residents.
great. Yeah,
So,
great. Yeah.
good to know.
Yes, yes.
And
Local arborist mulch is the way to go. Yeah, we don't need to be, you know, sustainability wise, it's it doesn't make sense to have mulch in our yards from Oregon or Pacific Northwest.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, excellent. Thank you all so much for joining today. I also want to encourage you all to sign up we have a few more webinars happening by the end of the year. I think we're about 2/3 through our season. So if you like this webinar, please tell your friends. Again, we've expanded our seminar series across several months to hopefully provide ample opportunities for learning. So be sure to check those out. And then finally, I mentioned this before, but you will be getting an email from us tomorrow with some follow-up resources, a link to a survey, and we would really appreciate any and all feedback you have if you can take a moment to fill that out.
Yeah, it's greatly appreciated for the survey for sure, because I know that Resource Central wants to continue this Firewise, you know, presentation and get the community's information on a yearly basis. So any information is really helpful. Your feedback is very helpful.
Absolutely. And I want to thank the city of Louisville again for making this happen.
Yes.
This is the first time that we've offered this topic. So Chris, we cannot thank you enough. And in regards, we had a few questions about Garden in a Box. I did just want to remind everyone the gardens are available to any homes who were damaged or destroyed in the Marshall Fire. We did have some questions about if they included entirely low flammable plants. At this time, the garden selection does not, but that is absolutely a direction, you know, we are headed in over the years. When we add garden designs, we definitely want to incorporate those principles and those specific plants. But at the time, I think that this presentation has been wildly helpful for how to actually plant a garden in a box in a way that can be more defensible. So
yes,
thank you so much, Chris. This has been fantastic.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay. Contact me if you have any questions.
Absolutely. Have a great night.
See ya.